When the HOA president tried to evict him, she had no idea she was walking into her own nightmare. Malik Patterson had always dreamed of owning property in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. After years of hard work, he finally made it happen. The house, a stunning two-story brick home in Brentwood Estates, Tennessee, sat on a neatly trimmed lot with a wraparound porch and a spacious backyard. It was exactly what he had envisioned. Peaceful, elegant, and the perfect place to settle down. But something felt off from the very first day. Moving boxes still lined the driveway when Malik noticed the eyes. Peeking from behind curtains, watching from porches, lingering a second too long as neighbors walked their dogs. No one approached. No friendly introductions. No welcome to the neighborhood. Just silence. At first he brushed it off. Maybe people here just kept to themselves. Maybe they'd warm up over time. The first sign that wouldn't happen came the next morning. Malik had barely finished brewing his coffee when he heard a sharp knock at the door. He opened it to find a woman in her mid-60s standing on his porch. She was dressed in a neatly pressed beige blouse, pearl earrings, and a pin with the HOA emblem clipped onto her cardigan. Her posture was rigid, her expression neutral, but there was something in her eyes. Something Malik couldn't quite place. "Good morning," she said, her tone clipped. "I'm Barbara Whitman, president of the Brentwood Estates Homeowners Association." Malik extended a hand, offering a polite smile. "Nice to meet you. I know who you are," she interrupted, glancing past him into the house. "I wanted to go over a few things." She handed him a thick stack of printed documents, stapled in the corner. HOA guidelines. Malik skimmed the pages, noting the usual rules. Lawn maintenance, exterior paint restrictions, approved mailbox designs. Standard stuff. But then Barbara cleared her throat. "We like to maintain a certain standard here," she said, her gaze settling on the moving truck still parked in the driveway. "I assume you'll have that removed by this evening." Malik raised an eyebrow. "It'll be gone once I'm done unpacking." Barbara nodded. But it wasn't a satisfied nod, more like she was making a mental note. "Good," she said. "And just so you're aware, the HOA requires that trash bins be placed at the curb no earlier than 6 a.m. on collection day. I noticed yours were out last night." "I didn't put them out," Malik replied evenly. "The previous owners must have." Barbara pursed her lips. "I see. Well, in the future, please be mindful. We have rules for a reason." And just like that, she turned and walked away. Malik shut the door, exhaling slowly. Maybe she was just particular. A lot of HOA presidents were. He wasn't going to let one uptight neighbor ruin his fresh start. But the next few days made it clear, Barbara wasn't just particular, she was watching. A warning notice appeared in his mailbox about an unauthorized vehicle in the driveway. His own car. A second notice came about improper lawn maintenance. His grass had grown an inch, maybe 2. Then an HOA violation letter arrived about a porch light that was too bright, despite being the same fixture the previous owner had used. By the end of the week, Malik had collected a neat stack of papers from Barbara. He hadn't spoken to her since their first meeting, but it didn't matter. She had made herself known. Still, he kept his cool. Maybe she was this way with everyone. Maybe he just needed to follow the rules, and she'd back off. But that hope faded fast when Malik took an evening walk and passed by a group of neighbors chatting on a nearby driveway. They grew quiet when they saw him. One woman offered a tight smile, but no one else acknowledged his presence. And there, standing in the middle, was Barbara. Arms crossed, whispering something to the others. Malik didn't need to hear the words to know. This wasn't about HOA rules. It was about him. But if Barbara thought she could intimidate him into leaving, she was in for a surprise. The letters kept coming. Each morning, Malik found a new notice folded neatly in his mailbox, sealed with the Brentwood Estates HOA stamp. At first he tossed them in a kitchen drawer, skimming them just enough to confirm what he already knew. Barbara Whitman was determined to make his life miserable. But by the time he received the 5th letter in just 2 weeks, Malik had had enough. This time, it was about his trash cans. "Bins must be retrieved within 1 hour of collection to preserve neighborhood aesthetics," the letter read. Malik stared at the paper, irritation bubbling under his skin. He had picked up his bins the same way his neighbors had, after work, But apparently that wasn't good enough. Curious, he decided to do a little test. The next morning, he woke up early and took a slow walk through the neighborhood, paying close attention to the houses. By 9 a.m., dozens of trash bins were still lined up along the curbs. Some weren't even fully closed, lids propped open with overflowing bags. Not a single violation notice on any of them. Just his. Malik snapped a few pictures and sent an email to the HOA board, politely asking why his bins were an issue while everyone else's were ignored. No response. But 2 days later, Barbara was back on his doorstep. She didn't knock this time, just stood there, waiting, arms crossed, clipboard in hand. Malik opened the door and leaned against the frame. "Something I can help you with?" Barbara didn't answer right away. She looked over his shoulder, eyes scanning the inside of his home like she was taking inventory. Then, she held up a form. "This is a formal request for you to submit proof of home ownership," she said. "We've had complaints." Malik's stomach tightened. "Complaints? Neighbors have expressed concerns," Barbara continued, her voice syrupy but sharp. "They've noticed unusual activity, different cars coming and going, furniture deliveries at odd hours. Some are worried you may be renting this property in violation of HOA regulations." Malik let out a short, humorless laugh. "You're kidding." Barbara's face didn't flinch. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "First off, I own this house. Second, I've lived here less than a month. I'm still moving in. That's why there have been deliveries. And as for the cars, those are friends and family visiting." Barbara pressed her lips together, her fingers tightening around her clipboard. "Well, we have policies to ensure all homeowners are properly vetted. We'll need to verify your deed." Malik knew exactly what this was. He didn't ask any other neighbors for proof of home ownership, just him. Still, he kept his voice level. "You can pull the records yourself. It's public information." Barbara's eyes narrowed slightly, but she quickly recovered, smoothing out her expression. "I'd prefer if you submitted it directly." Malik tilted his head. "And if I don't?" Barbara's lips curled into something that was supposed to be a smile, but there was no warmth behind it. "Then I'll have no choice but to escalate the matter with the HOA board." Malik exhaled slowly, holding back the words sitting on the tip of his tongue. She wanted him to react. She wanted him to get angry, to raise his voice, to give her an excuse to turn him into the problem. So he just smiled. "I'll think about it," he said, then closed the door before she could say another word. Barbara didn't like that. That evening, as Malik sat on his porch sipping a beer, he saw her again, standing at the end of his driveway, talking to a man in a polo shirt and khakis. She gestured toward Malik's house, speaking in hushed tones. The man nodded, scribbling something down on a notepad. Malik didn't have to guess what was happening. Barbara wasn't just trying to intimidate him anymore. She was looking for a way to get rid of him. But if she thought she could push him out, she was about to learn a hard lesson. The next morning, Malik woke up to an email from the HOA. Subject: Notice of violation. It was about his porch furniture. According to the email, his outdoor seating arrangement, 2 wicker chairs and a small glass table, did not conform to the aesthetic standards outlined in the HOA guidelines. A vague rule, one that clearly wasn't being enforced on anyone else. Malik leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He had walked this neighborhood more than enough times to know that at least a dozen homes had similar setups. Some even had old plastic chairs that looked like they had been sitting out since the early 2000s. And yet, somehow, his was the problem. He ignored the notice. A day later, another email arrived. Subject: Second notice. Lawn maintenance violation. Malik frowned. His lawn was freshly cut, edged and watered. He had spent the entire afternoon trimming the hedges, making sure everything was spotless. But there it was. A formal complaint stating that his grass was slightly overgrown, and warning that fines could be issued if the problem wasn't corrected. Malik knew exactly what was happening. Barbara was trying to drown him in complaints, stacking up minor infractions until she had enough leverage to escalate things. So he decided to play her game. That evening, he took a slow walk through the neighborhood, jotting down every single actual violation he saw. Overgrown yards, broken shutters, faded house numbers, trash bins still sitting by the curb from the morning before. Then he submitted his own complaints, each one backed with time-stamped photos. It took less than 24 hours for Barbara to show up again. This time she wasn't alone. She stood at the edge of Malik's driveway with another HOA board member, an older man with salt and pepper hair and a clipboard in hand. Malik recognized him from the HOA website. Stephen Reynolds, vice president. Barbara's expression was tighter than usual, the forced politeness barely masking her irritation. "Mr. Patterson," she greeted, her voice stretched thin. "We received your list of complaints." Malik crossed his arms, nodding. "Good. Then you know I'm not the only one being held to a ridiculous standard." Stephen cleared his throat, glancing at Barbara before speaking. "We appreciate your concerns, but the HOA board determines which issues require action. Not every minor infraction warrants a formal notice." Malik scoffed. "So mine do, but everyone else's don't." Barbara didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out a printed form and handed it to him. "This is your final warning before fines are issued. Your porch furniture needs to be replaced, and your lawn must remain at the regulated length at all times." Malik stared at the paper, then slowly looked up at Barbara. He wasn't stupid. This wasn't about grass or furniture. This was about making him feel like he didn't belong. He took a deep breath, forcing a slow smile. "You know, Barbara, I've read the HOA bylaws from top to bottom. Nowhere does it say a homeowner needs to replace furniture that's in perfect condition." Barbara stiffened. "It's a matter of neighborhood uniformity." Malik raised an eyebrow. "So you enforce rules that don't exist?" Barbara's jaw twitched. Stephen shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, Malik saw it. Doubt creeping into the board member's expression. He wasn't fully convinced. Malik decided to push a little further. "Let me ask you something," he said, keeping his tone even. "If I was someone else, say, one of my neighbors, would we even be having this conversation?" Barbara's nostrils flared. Stephen opened his mouth, hesitated, then closed it again. No answer. Malik nodded, folding the paper in half. "That's what I thought." Barbara inhaled sharply, forcing a tight-lipped smile. "If you refuse to comply, the HOA has the authority to take further action." Malik met her gaze unwavering. "Then do what you have to do." Barbara turned on her heel and walked away, her posture stiff with barely contained frustration. Stephen lingered for a second, then followed. Malik watched them go, gripping the violation notice in his hand. He had just called her bluff, but Barbara wasn't the type to back down easily. Malik expected Barbara to retaliate. He just didn't expect how far she'd take it. The next morning, a thick envelope sat in his mailbox. No HOA logo this time. Instead, it was from a law firm. Inside was an official complaint filed with the Davidson County Housing Authority, accusing him of being a fraudulent occupant. Barbara had gone from petty fines to trying to have him legally removed from his own home. Malik stared at the document, his pulse steady but his hands tightening around the paper. She was really doing this. He read through the complaint. The claims were flimsy. Allegations that he had failed to provide proof of home ownership, suspicions that he was renting the property under false pretenses, and a statement that multiple neighbors had expressed concerns about his presence. No names, no actual proof, just assumptions dressed up in legal jargon. For a second, Malik considered ignoring it. The accusations wouldn't hold up. But then he realized this wasn't about getting him evicted. It was about exhausting him. Barbara wanted him buried in legal headaches. She wanted him frustrated, drained, willing to just walk away rather than fight back. But what she didn't know was that she was playing right into his hands. That evening, Malik made a phone call. "Hey, Joe," he said when the line picked up. "I need a favor." Joe Martinez had been Malik's real estate attorney for years. Sharp, relentless, and twice as ruthless as Barbara ever hoped to be. By the next morning, Malik had everything he needed. And he wasn't just going to defend himself, he was about to flip the entire situation on its head. 3 days later, the HOA emergency board meeting was packed. Barbara sat at the head of the long conference table, her expression carefully neutral. The other board members flanked her, some looking uncomfortable, others pretending to be busy with their notes. The room buzzed with whispered conversations, homeowners shifting in their seats, glancing between Malik and the board. They had all heard the rumors. They were waiting for a showdown. Barbara cleared her throat, lifting a printed document. "We're here to address the ongoing issue regarding Mr. Patterson's residence. Given the numerous violations and the concerns raised by our community members, I'd like to speak," Malik interrupted, his voice calm but firm. Barbara's lips thinned. "You'll have a chance to respond after." "No," Malik said, setting down a stack of his own papers. "I'm speaking now." A murmur spread through the room. Barbara stiffened, but she gestured for him to continue. Malik stood, unfolding the first document. "This," he said, holding up the deed to his house, "is the legal proof that I own my home. Filed, recorded, and indisputable." A few heads turned. Some of the board members exchanged glances. Malik set the deed down and pulled out another paper. "This," he continued, "is the purchase agreement for another property, 214 Oakwood Drive." Barbara's face barely changed, but Malik saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes.